Welcome to Growing Your Team, a podcast designed for small business owners seeking to grow their company with the help of employees and contractors. Your time is limited, which means growing and leveraging teams is essential for business success. The Growing Your Team podcast is the place to learn tips and techniques designed to help you know when it's the right time to hire, how to select perfect fit team members, and how to maximize productivity while creating a positive work environment. Drawing from her 10-plus years of leadership and hiring experience, here is your host, Jamie Van Kuyk.
Hello, Jamie Van Kuyk here, and welcome to the Growing Your Team podcast. This week, we are continuing on the topic that I introduced last week in episode 7 about employees versus independent contractors. So last week, I briefly gave you an introduction to what is an employee and what is an independent contractor. As I mentioned in that episode, this is something that I see many small businesses get wrong, and when they get it wrong, it can have big impacts on their business and huge financial impacts. Today, I am bringing on April Goodwin, who is a lawyer in the state of Florida who focuses mostly on employment law and issues dealing with employees. One of the issues that she deals with a lot is employee misclassification. So this is when companies hire people with an independent contractor status so that they can avoid paying the employee level taxes and avoid the responsibility that comes with having employees. But really, the way the government defines employees versus independent contractors, these people are employees, not independent contractors. The cases that April deals with are on both sides, where it's the person who was misclassified going after the company because they are owed taxes and possibly other back benefits. And she also in certain cases represents the company who has these cases coming against them because they made mistakes and they misclassified their team members. And when someone should have been an employee, they accidentally or sometimes maliciously had them as independent contractors. So we are going to dig into really what is the legal ramifications of misclassifying your team members and some things that you can be aware of and steps you can take so you avoid team member misclassification and avoid the hefty legal fines and other government fines that come with it when a case is presented because you misclassified your team members, which happens more often than people think it does. So let's jump into the interview. Welcome, April. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, can you kick us off with telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Yes, I am a Florida attorney. I've been an attorney in Florida for 18 years. Oh, wow. Yeah, over 18 years. And my firm is the Goodwin Firm. It's in Largo, Florida. I do practice throughout Florida and state and federal courts. And our firm focuses on representing employers and to some extent employees in employment matters, anything ranging from, you just need some contracts or you need someone to talk to know whether or not it's legal, something you want to do or don't want to do, or all the way up to a lawsuit and going all the way to trial.
Oh, awesome. There's so many different parts of law and so many different things that you can practice. What made you choose this particular part of law?
That's a good question. My mother was a human resource, still is actually kind of in the human resources field. So that was something that I, grew up with being, kind of surrounded by, these types of issues. So it was just something that was always kind of interesting to me. Work is certainly something that any, busy professional knows it takes up a huge part of our lives. So it's something that affects everybody pretty much at some point. So it's just, was something that it's interesting. It's an ever-changing law. It's I had an intern tell me one time, you do really hard stuff, So it's definitely intellectually stimulating, and no day is the same. So it fulfills that need too.
Yeah, I definitely agree that employment law is very challenging, especially with
Yeah.
all the laws, the different laws that are like, things changing now and then as new bills get passed, as new protections are put in place. It's even, I would say, more difficult when your business and your staff is crossing state lines. So not only do you have to worry about what's going on in your state, you have to worry about what's going on in a different state. And it's like, which one takes priority? And I was just like, oh my goodness, I am so glad that there's people like you that as business owners we can turn to, because we're never going to know it all. Like, yeah, and you put
Right.
yourself at a lot of risk when you don't get the right support in this area.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And crossing state lines, especially now with the internet, really, loosened up as far as who qualifies as marketing across state lines. Some of the laws, the federal laws, because of the way the Constitution is written and everything, are supposed to only apply to interstate commerce. Well, they apply to everybody. You can have a local, for example, law firm, and they still have to follow the federal, laws, and not just because a lot of times there's state laws that go along with that too, but also because you've got a website, you're involved in interstate commerce. You're getting your shipment of supplies from Staples, which is based in I don't even know where, but not Florida. You're involved in interstate commerce. So the
Right.
way our economy is now is pretty much everybody's involved in interstate commerce, which opens you up to a whole lot of different aspects of liability and responsibility as an employer.
Well, I would say that's definitely really interesting and something that I never thought of, because I just always assumed, not being in the law myself, that federal law trumped everything just because it was kind of federal law in terms of like the minimums that you had to follow. Then obviously if your state law is more restrictive or stuff like that, you had to follow that. But that I never thought about, even if you're not employing those, that you're crossing state lines with everything that we do, because of
Right.
the fact that it's, yeah, you're going to order off of Amazon or Staples. You're not necessarily going to always be going to the person that's right next door and having just that local economy. As much as we loved supporting local and supporting local businesses, there's so many aspects of your business that are just going to be crossing state lines because that's the way it is.
Correct, correct. And there is some, what you talked about, is what the, when there's a conflict between state and federal, and I don't want to get too bogged down in constitutional law, but there are some things that, do that, that comes up. If, for example, a good example would be like, say, California or New York, that's got a lot more liberal state employment laws. Their laws are going to trump the federal law in some circumstances, just because they're giving employees more rights. But some others they don't, and that gets really complicated. Fortunately for me, in most cases, the federal and the state law in Florida, coincide with each other, and they pretty much track each other. So there's not a whole lot of that analysis. But sometimes when there's a conflict, you do have to think about whether it's federal or state, regardless of being involved in interstate commerce, whether those apply. But again, I don't want to get too bogged down in that because it doesn't apply to Florida, and so we don't care for my purposes.
Yeah, I think it's, interesting you did bring up California. When I'm talking to someone, as soon as they're like, well, I live in California, or I'm going to hire someone in California, I was like, oh my goodness, like you definitely need to talk to an employment lawyer, because there are so many things that you have to worry about. And I was even talking to someone the other week who does a lot of HR handbook policy writing. And she goes, oh, I just won't work with someone if they're in California, because there's so many things that you have to worry about. She goes, but it's always good to keep an eye on those laws, because most of them end up trickling down to other states because other states take them on. But for the purpose of today, we really wanted to talk about employees versus independent contractors. There's so many things we can talk about with employment law, but I really feel like this is a topic that most people really don't understand, even though it's something that if they're employing people and hiring members for their teams, they're dealing with it all the time. And I think people are always putting themselves at risk for what is employee misclassification. Can you tell us a little bit about that? A little bit about the difference between employees and independent contractors and all
Sure,
of that?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a little caveat here, since we brought up California, California just signed a new law that has taken effect about independent contractors. And I'm not a California attorney, so I'm not going to talk about it. So if you are in California, then you should definitely talk to a California attorney, employment attorney, about that new law and how it's affecting people. And that might the news is that, people who on the employee side are hopeful that will end up being across the country, but it's not yet. It's just California. So anyway, so the difference is, between the independent contractor and an employee really are the IRS has a 20-point checklist basically to determine whether or not 20 factors to look at whether or not somebody is an employee or an independent contractor. So a lot of my employer clients think, okay, well I've got somebody who I'm going to call an independent contractor, and they agree to being an independent contractor, and therefore they're an independent contractor. It's not something that you can, as an individual or a business for that matter, contract away, that you can say, okay, I agree that I'm not an independent contractor. This applies whether or not they agree to it. It is what it is. It's not, you can't just say, call yourself an independent contractor, call your employee an independent contractor and make it so. So really, what courts look at, what the IRS look at, it's the same thing, is whether or not there are the totality of their circumstances. And an employee is, there's pros and cons to each one from a business perspective as to whether or not you wanted someone to be an employee or an independent contractor, but really it comes down to how much control you have over that individual. So if you are telling them, where to go, what to do when they get there, what time to be there, how the work is done, then that's going to be more likely an employment relationship. Are you having to train them? Is there a company, provided training, orientations, things of that matter? How much, are they integrated into your particular business? Are they, how significantly do they affect your business? Are they like paralegals in the legal sense? A lot of times, law firms want to make their paralegal an independent contractor, especially new, younger law firms, and they're just, maybe the attorney's busy and they don't have time to deal with figuring out the tax implications and everything. So they just go, oh, you're an independent contractor, 1099. Those are things that they can't really, your paralegal is a lot of times, if they're running the show, which a lot of times in law firms they are, they are not, they're probably not going to be an independent contractor. So somebody like that, office manager or somebody like that is really not going to be an independent contractor. They're really, integral to your business. How much control do they have over of their own day? That is, and their work. That is another, indication that if they don't have a lot of that control, then they're not, they're going to be, an employee. The quintessential example that I use is you're hiring a plumber. Okay, you're hiring a plumber. Your plumber tells you when they're going to be there. They may coordinate it with you, but it's, it's a back and forth. Same thing with their price. They set the price. They tell you how much it's going to be. You can say no. You can negotiate with them, but it's really up to them whether they're willing to do the work for that price. And they also bring their own tools. That's another key example. If you're providing everything to the person who's doing the work, in an office context, it may be a computer, it may be a phone, in another trade context, it may be their tools, the truck, things like that. Then they are more likely to be determined to be an employee. But your plumber who you call up and come to your house, they bring their own tools. They can also take other jobs. That's another test, is whether or not they are able to do other work for other people. If they're working for you full time, they can't do that. You have those, some interesting, thoughts as to whether or not if you have a non-compete, you've got to be careful with that as well with independent contractors. You can do it, but you have to word it pretty carefully. So those things are, also look at it, because really the idea of an independent contractor is you're supposed to be able to go out and, you don't just have one client. This is your business. You're out there doing it for other people. You have somebody who, day in, day out, they're coming and working for you. And you've got a continuity of relationship there. That's going to be more of an employee-employer relationship. Although if it's, a project based, again, it's your go-to plumber, and you have, them, then that's obviously that's okay. It's really more project based a lot of times, independent contractors as well.
Right.
Um,
That's always
uh,
one thing that I like try to remind my clients of is like I want this person who's going to be a member of my team forever. I want them to grow with my company. And I'm like, well, independent contractors are really more project based. I was like, the name itself, like contractors, it has contract in there. Contracts are normally, time based, project based. There's
right.
normally a clear beginning and a clear end, unlike employment where it continues on until someone decides, hey, this relationship's no longer working.
Right, right. And another thing too is, we're an at will state here in Florida, which at will means, and people confuse right to work with at will, and right to work's a union thing, but at will means either side can terminate an employment relationship. So you get into, if you start using that kind of language, or behaving that way, and really that's what with an independent, contractor or employee relationship, and determining that, the courts and the IRS are going to look at, what are you actually doing, not what did you put in writing, not, what do you agree to or they agree to, but what's actually going on. So if you're actually, saying, treating it as an at will kind of situation where, hey, they can leave at any time, I can leave at any time, then that lends itself to being more of an employer-employee relationship a lot of times as well, because a contract is usually, like you said, for a certain amount of
Yeah.
time. And so, or a certain project, like, hey, you're going to do this for me, and it may be till it's done, but you're going to do this for me. Again, the plumber, you're going to fix my sink, right?
Right.
And when that's done, then, we'll be done. And if my, toilet also needs to be fixed, then that'll be another, contract. It doesn't necessarily need to be in writing, but it's some sort of agreement that we have, that that's the way this is going to happen.
Mhm.
And you're not just, hanging out in my house, coming to my house every day from 9 to 5 and fixing whatever happens to need fixing. That would be more of a, an employee relationship. So
Right.
so those kinds of things, definitely are looked at as well.
Yeah.
And yeah,
I think you made an interesting point. And this is why I think, it needs a lot of clarification for people is there's a lot of bad advice out there when people are coming to hire. Like I see it constantly in a lot of Facebook groups and chats that I'm in, where as soon as someone's like mentions anything about employees, it's like, why do you have them as employees? Just hire them as an independent contractor. You save so much money for taxes. And I was like, oh my
yeah,
gosh, like no, like that's not the way to look at things. Like look at the relationship. The relationship is what dictates what they are, not just because you decide or how you want to pay your taxes
right,
or if they sign a contract. And that's one thing people have to understand. They're like, well, they signed a contract that's saying that they're independent contractors, so I'm good, I'm covered, nothing can
right,
happen to me. And it's like, and people need to understand that you can't have someone sign away like their rights. That contract would be reviewed to see if it's actually legit. And the IRS is not going to care that you have a contract. They're going to care about the relationship. And that brings
right.
me kind of like to the next thing. It's like, you know, helping people understand why misclassification is such a big deal and what can happen if you do get misclassify an employee and you're caught. Like what happens?
Right. So there's a few things, and people need to, understand too, that, at the time of, and this is true of any relationship, everybody's happy. So marriages, the happiest marriages can end in divorce. So everybody's happy and agreeable when it starts, right? But the problem is, things go bad, which happens, or I wouldn't have a job, or I'd be doing a different kind of law, right? So what could go wrong is that, first of all, and I'm not a tax attorney, I'm not a CPA. My joke is always, nobody should get tax advice from me. It was not my best grade in law school. So, yeah, and everybody laughs at that because they probably feel the same if they had done law school. So, but there is so seek advice for that, but you can get into trouble with the IRS. And it comes into a situation with the employment context is, just to go back to the IRS a little bit, the differences are, if for those who maybe don't realize what the benefit is to having an independent contractor from a tax standpoint, is that yes, you do pay less. You don't pay the payroll taxes. The employee would pay them. Pay their own Medicaid, Medicare, or Medicare. I'm sorry, Social Security, those kinds of things. Unemployment taxes, you wouldn't, you don't pay that, either, with an independent contractor. So, and frankly, it's, the first time I hired an employee for, my firm, I was like, oh, this is kind of a pain. Just the paperwork alone is I can't lie, it's kind of a pain. Now, once you get into the groove of doing it, it's not so bad. But it is, especially the first time you're learning about it and setting things up, it is kind of a pain. And I really believe that a lot of times it's not to save money on the taxes the way people do it, it's just easier.
Yes.
Again, by the time you're hiring your first, employee or two, you're busy. You waited too long probably to hire them. And so now you're just like, I can't deal with this. I'm just going to 1099 you, kick the can down the road. I'll worry about it at the end of the year, beginning of next year when I, do my 1099. So that's not a good thing to have, because what can happen in an employment context is employees are entitled to and cannot waive away, whether they're employees or independent contractors, cannot waive away their federal, and state, employment rights. In particular, the FLSA, the Fair Labor Standards Act, that dictates your right as an employee to overtime and the minimum wage, the federal minimum wage. Florida has a separate Florida minimum wage as well, which is higher, which most people know, and that changes every year, the amount. But the federal minimum wage and the overtime, statutes, they apply to employees only. So, and same thing with discrimination and all, FMLA, Family Medical Leave Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act, all those things are employed for employees. You have to be an employee to get that. So if you're an independent contractor, you lose those rights. And so misclassification is important because you could really run into a lot of liability if they had been in, you had classified them as an employee and you properly treated as an employee, not only would you be paying part of their taxes, so they're out money there, but you would also, if they had worked overtime, if they had, a minimum wage issue, a discrimination issue, a Family Medical Leave Act issue, something like that, you might not have given that to them because you thought they were an independent contractor. And so you are looking at a lot of problems. I've seen cases where, it comes up a lot with the overtime because people don't pay overtime because they're an independent contractor, they're not an employee. Well, if they're actually an employee, yes, you would be liable for overtime for, potentially, time they've been working for you. You would then, if you get sued for that, you'd have to pay their attorney's fees by the hour for what they've done, in addition to having to pay your own attorney to defend it. So it can get very, very pricey, even if it's just, you end up, the employee themselves only gets, a couple $100. I've seen cases where I've, had employees who I've represented who it was $600 that they ended up owing for the employee for overtime, which actually under the FLSA, you end up owing $1,200 because you owe double. There's a provision in there where it's called liquidated damages, where you would owe twice the amount. And then ended up, having to pay, because they fought it for so long, 6 figures in attorney fees to the other side.
Wow.
And it's just silly. And this was an independent contractor situation.
So I think you brought up a really good point about how relationships can be going well and then go south, and you never know. Like, a lot of people talk about how, like you mentioned, all marriages start great and then they can go south and people get divorced, and it's the same with your employee contractor relationships. My first job out of college, I was hired as an independent contractor when I was clearly an employee. There was no doubt about it. I was an employee, but I took the job because I didn't understand the difference. So here it is, my first full-time job, and they're telling me this is the tax form you have to fill out. This is what it means. I just thought it was different because, once again, this is my first full-time job. I had no idea about taxes or anything like that. So I just took it for what they told me because they're the business owner. They should know what's best, right? And it wasn't until the first time I filed for taxes and I was talking about things like with my parents, and they're like, you're not an independent contractor, you're an employee. And then I started researching it. And they kind of said, well, you can go and do something about it, but you're most likely going to lose that job. So if you like where you work, maybe just suck it up and deal with that. And then that job started to go south. And when that relationship finally ended, because I stood up for myself and I said, hey, if you're going to classify me as an independent contractor, then this is the way the relationship's going to go. And they said, well, we don't want a relationship that way, so we're ending the relationship. they decided to withhold money that was mine, that I had earned. And I was like, you can't not pay me for stuff that I've done. So, and I told them, I was like, if you do not pay me the money that you owe me, I'm going to turn you in for misclassification. And it was one of those situations where, yeah, it started off great. I had no intentions for over the first year that I was working there of ever turning him in for misclassification. At first, because I didn't know, and then because I liked where I was working. And then things changed quickly to it was toxic. And it was to the point where it was like, I felt like I didn't have a choice but to turn them in for misclassification because I was being hurt as that worker of not being treated the way I should have been treated, not getting the money that I was owed, and so many things. So it's like, yeah, it's one of those things you never know when someone's going to turn, and you're going to then be found that you're misclassifying your team members, your employees.
All right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's that. And then also, what can happen sometimes too is, and you're right, a lot of times employees don't realize, or individuals, don't realize, they think the same thing that a lot of employers think. I signed something that said I was an independent contractor or whatever. Or I hear the term, and I hear it more from employers, but they'll say like, oh, they're a 1099 employee. That doesn't exist. That's not a thing. You're an independent contractor or an employee. There's no such thing as a 1099 employee.
Yes.
And employers constantly conflate those things. So in addition to, let's say you go, okay, well, I'm just going to make sure they don't work over 40 hours. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I'm paying them at least minimum wage. So what else, in addition to the tax liability, from an employment standpoint, you can also be responsible for just the fact that you took away some of those rights that they may have had to, if there was an overtime issue, or if there was a discrimination issue. Then now all of a sudden, you've taken away that rate, and that may hold some sort of value. The other thing too is that in Florida, the statute, the law that employers get sued under for misclassification is the Florida Deceptive and Unfair Trade Practices Act, which also carries with it attorney's fees that you may have to pay if you win, or I'm sorry, if the employee wins. And that is well, either side wins, to be honest with you, but gets the prevailing party fees paid. So you won, you get the fees of your attorney and the cost of the litigation paid. So the question then, for that, what you're liable to a lot of times are things that maybe if you have other actual employees, are you contributing to their 401k? Do they get vacation time? Do those actual employees get sick time? Are there benefits, insurance, all those kinds of things that if this independent contractor had been properly classified, they would have also received. Again, with the ACA, the American, the Affordable Care Act, if you have a certain amount of employees, you're subject to that. So if, things like that, they could have, had, again, health insurance that you would have had to provide for them if they had, been, properly classified. And so that can get very pricey. FedEx, for example, and this is in California, but they had a class action, lawsuit, but it was under the federal law, filed against them for for misclassification, and they lost. And because obviously they've got employees and they provide really good benefits to those employees, and also because it was so many who were filing and who were subject to this misclassification, they settled for over $200 million.
Wow.
Yeah, so it is a real risk to employers to misclassify their employees as independent contractors. And again, I acknowledge the fact, as an employer myself, it is a pain, especially when you're first setting it up, to do that. Sometimes it is the tax burden can be a lot if you're cutting it close, and you're just it's not just because you're greedy. Maybe things are tight, but you still have to do it. It's just not worth the risk. And again, somebody leaves, and it's all well and good, and then they're mad about why things went south. I've seen cases where a case starts out as a discrimination case, and it's not really that good of a discrimination case, because those cases are actually really hard. But geez, you misclassified them, and you should have paid them overtime or whatever. And now this crappy discrimination case that they're mad, that's the reason why they called an attorney. Now all of a sudden, you've got an attorney looking at it, and they see all these other things there with misclassification, and now you've got, a real problem on your hands. So you just really have to be careful with that because, yeah, like you said, things start out all hunky dory and then can go south fast in
Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly. And I know we're talking more about like the legal side here, but I know from all the research that I have done on the IRS side's from a tax side, they'll fine you differently if they think you did it on purpose versus you just didn't understand. So they have a thing in there where it's, I think, malicious intent. So if
Right.
they see a pattern, they believe you should have known the difference. Like you're going to get heftier fines than if they're like, okay, you made a mistake. We're still going to fine you because you made a mistake and you didn't file your taxes properly. So here's a fine. But yeah, if you do
Right.
it, if they determine there's malicious intent there, you get bigger fines.
Oh, absolutely. And the IRS actually has a as a well, and also too, that's also true in a lawsuit, standpoint because of punitive damages and your intent and all of that. And if you did it, even if you don't have those kinds of damages of, hey, you did this maliciously, and so we're going to, you're opening yourself up to more in a lawsuit. Just from if you decide to fight it the whole way, a jury perspective, they're going to not be as kind to you if,
Right.
if it comes out that you did this on purpose. And this is an employment context, but I like using this because everybody knows about the McDonald's lawsuit, the 2 million or whatever, which or she didn't actually end up getting. That's a whole other issue. But one reason why the jury came up with that high number because they didn't like I think it was the CEO of McDonald's, but the McDonald's person who testified because they said, yeah, we know our coffee's hot. We don't really care. And we know some people are going to be injured. We don't really care. They didn't like him, so they dinged him. That
Right.
happens,
Right.
So, but the IRS actually has a program that, and because here's the thing too. So there may be people listening or people out there who think like business owners who think like, oh crap, I've misclassified people. I hope, let's pray that, the people who I have now, nothing goes bad and I'll just, fix it from here on out. The IRS has a voluntary classification settlement program that you can, VCSP is, the abbreviation for it. And you can, look that up online and participate in that where you have to be eligible. And I don't know, again, I'm not a tax attorney, so I don't know all the eligibility requirements. But if you want to reclassify, they will then kind of give you some relief on your past federal employment taxes that you may owe. So
Oh,
that's
good.
worth checking out because again, the risk is really there from not only the IRS perspective but also the employment perspective, and it's worth doing that, and it's much better to do that. And the other thing with overtime, and uh, minimum wages, those have very short statute limitations. That is how long the employees have to sue. It's 2 years, whereas a lot of lawsuits are 4 years. Like discrimination is like 4 years, most of it. So excuse me. So they are very, you know, uh, you can, you know, limit some of your liability there too. It's better to fix it, even if they're still working for you under this, way. It's better to fix it, and chances are the person will appreciate it as well. Maybe not because maybe they're not paying their taxes and they'd rather have the money now than later or whatever, and think like, okay, well, if I don't claim everything or I can be creative or whatever on my taxes as a employee or as an independent contractor more than I could be as an employee. So there's benefits to the employee as well, but really you got to be really careful because when things go south, it's bad, and you can't retaliate if somebody. That's a very good point, and I've told employees that too. That okay, we can you can file a lawsuit, you can fight this now, but they may fire you. If you do that, that's retaliation as an employer. That is illegal. That's a whole other lawsuit. Even if the employee was wrong, even if they turned out, oh no, maybe they really shouldn't have been an independent contractor, but you fired them for that. That could be a retaliation case.
Mhm.
But that is something as well. Now that said, the reality of it is it does happen, but it's very you're opening yourself up to a whole other issue of retaliation. In fact, most claims that involve employment, whether it's discrimination or overtime or what have you, misclassification, a lot of them involve retaliation as well, and that's really where employers get into trouble. So, if somebody does complain about this, you can't, legally anyway, fire them or discipline them in any way for doing that. Just get it fixed, and if you need to get it fixed, and go from there. But yeah, firing them or disciplining them for that is a whole other problem that could really open you up to a lot of liability.
Wow, I wish I knew that, because when I was let go after calling out that I was an it was an employer relationship and not an independent contractor relationship, and they ended it, I was like, maybe I could have made a lot of money off of that decision. But
somebody could have, maybe the lawyer who was representing you would have. Yeah.
Well, maybe I could have earned you a lot of money off of that that thing. But yeah, that's always one thing I tell my clients a lot of times, like when it comes to certain things, like obviously I'm not a lawyer, so I'm always like, maybe sometimes we need to go get legal representation, you need to run this by an attorney. But I always tell them is like, just because you can't win a lawsuit doesn't mean they won't try. So,
right.
They could come after you and like saying that you misclassified or saying like you did these things, and they have no really leg to stand on and they won't try, but that still takes your time. So even if the other person loses and they have to pay both sides lawyer fees, you still get so much time sucked away. And as a small business owner, you don't have time to spend on legal issues when you could have just done things right and properly and made sure you cross your T's and dot your I's from the beginning.
Right. Well, what I always tell people is, as an attorney, I think every attorney gets asked this question, by friends, family members, random people on the street. Can I sue so-and-so for this, about anything, right? And my my response is to that. This is America. You can sue anybody for anything. The question is whether or not you can win, and if you win, how much you can win. And the thing with a business is a business can't represent itself in litigation. So that means you have to get an attorney. So even if it's complete BS, you have to hire an attorney to review that and to get it. And there's no guarantee that if you just go and get dismissed, you probably won't get your attorney's fees paid back. That's the prevailing party. So it means, if you take it all the way, or if it goes to a certain point and there's a judgment in your favor, then, you have an argument to get it back. But a lot of times, if it's just, an attorney picking up the phone and saying to the other side, like, listen, this is like, let me give you some documents to show that this is all, that your claim is frivolous, and they agree and that it goes away, then, then you may not get those fees back. Or you do, a lot more than that even, a lawsuit's filed and you're fighting it, and it's not always that you're able to get your fees back, and you get your fees back from the employee. It's not the attorney for the, unless it's really super frivolous, it's not the attorney who pays back those fees. Their employee comes to an attorney, and the attorney doesn't know. They just got to go based on what their client is telling them. So unless they keep going even after they have evidence that the case is frivolous, you're not going to get that money from the attorney. It's going to be from the employee. Employees don't have money.
Right.
They're suing, right? So they're so you are you can get a piece of paper that says they need to reimburse you for the $100,000 that you spent for your attorney, but that doesn't, to fight the case, but that doesn't mean that you're going to get that. And even if they have it, they can file bankruptcy. They can so there's a whole lot of things. So you really have to be I tell my employer clients, like, you cannot count on being able to get money from the employee.
That's definitely a really good point. Thank you for calling that out. So one of the last questions I have around this is, all right, so we have a lot of small business owners listening. Some of them are probably like, oh, maybe I'm misclassifying, or they're in the process where they're trying to build their team for the first time. So they're trying to figure out exactly what is the right thing to do. So what can people do? What can business owners do to make sure that they're making the right decision when they decide that this looks like an independent contractor position?
Right. If they are wanting if they're wanting somebody, or thinking that somebody should be an independent contractor. Now, that said, you're never going to get in trouble as far as with, somebody, suing you if you classify somebody who is an independent contractor and you make them an employee. You might pay taxes you shouldn't have. You might be opening yourself up to potential issues for, again, paying the overtime and things like that. But you're not going, the IRS isn't going to come out. I mean, you're paying them more taxes. They don't care, right?
Right.
So those kinds. So if you want to really err on the side of safety, you err on the side of them being, an employee. You're not going to get, there's no misclassification where, they're an employee and they should have been an independent contractor. That's not, nobody's going to sue you for that. There are reasons though where, you may not, want them to be an employee and they shouldn't be. And now I talked myself out of remembering what your question was. What was your question?
just how can you stay safe and know that you're making the right decision for an
Oh, right,
independent
right. Oh, call
contractor?
me. There you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So really, yeah, talking to an employment attorney again, like you said, there's a lot. I mean, there's the IRS checklist. Like you said, it's not okay. This one thing or these five things or it's not a quiz where if you meet 5 out of 10 or 10 out of 20 or whatever that they're independent contractor or an employee. And so really, and there's case law out there too, right? So there's cases out there that interpret the IRS, classification, factors, and you you should have somebody who knows, about that, those cases and can talk to you about those cases and your, individual situation. You're going to get, whether it's an attorney or a CPA or whoever it is you talk to about this, you're going to get an it depends answer. Nothing. It's very, very rare that somebody is really that clear cut. I shouldn't say it's rare. There is a line. Unfortunately, it's not rare because people miss, businesses, small businesses in particular, well, even FedEx, sometimes it's really clear. But there are there is that gray area where it's pros and cons. And again, in my advice in those situations is, unless there's really some sort of extenuating circumstances where you just really can't have this person be an employee, then you should classify the gray area as an employee, or you start molding it to fit the IRS, standards better. You start doing
Yes.
something that will, and then it could be that it's not just well, geez, now I've got to have this person be an employee, and I'm going to have to pay some back taxes or whatever. We'll change some things, make it better so they are better fit the independent contractor rules and maybe some simple things that you're able to do on that. And you can limit
Yep.
your liability, whether it's your tax liability or your liability in a lawsuit for that as well.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that's great. And that's one thing what I work with a lot with clients is, if it gets to that really blurred line of independent contractor employee, I always say consult with an attorney because I don't want to take the risk or the liability of leading them
Right.
wrong. But with everything, when we're creating positions for companies, it's like, okay, you have this idea of what you want this position to be, but what's really the best thing for that position to be? And sometimes we have to tweak things. And I remember working with a client in the past, and we were kind of navigating that position of, should it be an employee, should it be an independent contractor? And there were some things it was like, okay, well, if you want it to be clear, 100% clear of this side or this side, here are some things you can and cannot do. Here are some things you need to tweak. Do these things matter to your company if it's on one or the other? Okay, well, if those really matter, it's going to more likely sway it this side than this way. And we were able to have this great conversation and kind of develop what this position should look like. And it was like, okay, and then take this, now go speak to your lawyer and say, okay, to have that final check off on their point of view from
Right.
a legal side, does it still seem right? But because they really wanted an independent contractor position, and it's just sometimes that education of here's what that means. And as business owners, you're navigating a lot of new territory when you do this, so you don't always understand what everything means because you haven't done it before. So as I always
Right.
say, it's like get the help that you need to make sure you're doing things right. There's nothing wrong with saying, hey, can someone help interpret this for me?
Right. And it's good to have a third set of eyes on there because what I find, especially with small business owners and especially hiring their you know, first employees or first people, whatever they may be, is that it's a control thing. And I know that from my own experience as well. It is like, this is my baby. And I'm finally at the point where I'm succeeding enough to bring somebody else on. And, and I want them here from this time to this time because I want control. It's hard to do that and a lot of times, especially those first few employees, it like I said, it's past due in part because
Right.
we have problems delegating, our work for our baby. And so, and it's that. So it's good to have an objective person, not only who knows what they're talking about, obviously that's the most important thing, but also somebody who can kind of have that, come to Jesus talk with you about, listen, if this is what you want to do, you're going to have to give up some control because that's really what an independent contractor is they have more control over
Yes,
their lives and
exactly.
everything than an employee does. Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right.
And that's
So
hard to get that.
if someone is in the state of Florida and they need to get in touch with someone to help them navigate these type of issues or really anything dealing with employment law, how can they contact you?
Hey, well, my firm office number is 727-316-5333. And then also we are online. I have our website is www.goodwin, GOODWIN hyphen or dash firm, FIRM.com. We have a contact me on that as well. You can also even schedule a consultation. And just for the record too is for new clients to our businesses, we offer a free kind of comprehensive evaluation of their business, sit down, talk to them, not a specific issue maybe that you're having with like, hey, I need help on this right now, but, hey, what are all my employment needs? Tell me about your business. I'll help you, kind of figure that out and kind of, evaluate your potential, employment needs in that respect as well for something that is, again, you don't have a specific issue right now. You just want to get your stuff straight and make sure that everything's good. So there's that as well. But yeah, we're online at goodwin-firm.com, and our phone number again, 727-316-5333.
Awesome. And I'll include those in the show notes so people can easily find it. Well, April, thank you so much for your time today. But before you go, I have one question that I like to ask all my guests. The purpose of this podcast is to really help people become better leaders, better bosses, better employers. And I think we can always learn something by hearing good things about others and how other bosses and other leaders have impacted us. So think about the best boss you've ever had. And can you tell us one characteristic or quality that person had that really made it so it was a good relationship?
I would say, the best boss I ever had was, another attorney. He was a managing partner, and, he wasn't a perfect boss, and nobody's perfect. There are things that I probably, could say that I would change about his management style or what he did, but he actually really cared, about us as people. He cared about making sure that we were developed as, newer, younger attorneys. He wasn't, greedy with the work that he had, to not, share and not mentor us. But really, it was, and he was just a fun guy and nice, and that really, made a difference. And I think that is, really the key is, are you a leader? If you're a leader, you are, helping the people under you, even if that means, hey, they may, take off, they may go and fly and do their own thing as I did, or they may, do that. And we're still friends, and he is, supportive, and has even actually, sent me cases. So that is really, I think, the hallmark of a good leader is somebody who wants to see their staff, their employees, succeed, even if it's not within their own business.
Oh, that is so great. Yeah, he truly sounds like he was a great boss in that area.
And that wraps up the interview with April Goodwin here on the Growing Your Team podcast. If you have questions about whether someone is an employee or an independent contractor, and you're in the state of Florida, reach out to April and get your questions answered so you can avoid the costly mistake of employee misclassification. If you're not in Florida and you need help, reach out to me. I have lots of contacts across the U.S. that can help you with this matter so you do things right and get the right people on your team without the risk of legal issues or fines from the IRS or any other government institution. Until next time, this is Jamie Van Kuyk.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Growing Your Team with your host, Jamie Van Kuyk. Be sure to subscribe and head on over to growingyourteam.com to connect, access the show notes, and discover more ways to hire and leverage your perfect fit team.